My name is Roberta McIntyre, and I'm with Fire Safe Sonoma. And with me today, thank you, is the other three collaborators that make up the Resilient Landscape Coalition, the outfit that's bringing you these wonderful presentations. So, also a member of the collaboration is the Habitat Corridor Project. And here with the Habitat Corridor Project is Amy Owens and Jennifer Roberts. And also a huge participant in this endeavor is the Sonoma Ecology Center. And our members from the Sonoma Ecology Center include Eric Scholes, Caitlin Cornwell, Ellie Inslee, and Rachel Bean. And also to round us out, we have as a additional collaborator, UC Master Gardener Program of Sonoma County, Mimi Enright, and Jennifer Roberts. So those are the four entities that make up the Resilient Landscape Coalition. And we've been together for, gosh, I want to say 2 or 3 years now, working very hard. 4 or 5 years, I guess. Yeah. My goodness, how time flies. And then this presentation is also made possible through funding from Sonoma County Ag and Open Space, and also with support from our collaborating agencies, CAL FIRE, our local fire departments, and of course, Sonoma County Vegetation Management, etc. So, yeah, this is part 4 of a 4-part series that we started with part 1, sustainability in the defensible space and beyond, and part 2 was defensible space zones and code requirements. And then last week on the 21st, we had Firewise design within the defensible space zone. And today we're finishing all off with maintenance in the defensible space zone. All of these presentations are available on the Resilient Landscape website, Coalition website, as well as the Resilient Landscape Coalition's YouTube channel. And I imagine that somebody will put those in the chat somewhere along the way so people can find them readily and maybe put them in a safe place for safekeeping in case you want to find them later. So with that, I am going to turn it over. Real quick, let's go over some housekeeping. Questions will be taken from the Q&A box only. So if you have something you want to share in the chat, that's fine. But if you have a specific question you want to ask the presenter or one of the panelists, please be sure and put that in the chat. In the Q&A. Boy, am I confusing everyone. Also want to remind you guys, in case you forgot, this webinar is being recorded. And of course, this one will be added to our library that I mentioned earlier. So you'll be able to find this 4th presentation with the earlier 3 presentations. So with that, I am handing it off to Jennifer Roberts to take us through this amazing presentation. It's all yours, Jennifer.
Thank you, Roberta. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. All right. So tonight we are going to take a look at maintenance practices for plant health and how these relate to Firewise landscaping. So I'm going to talk about pruning, mowing, mulching, and irrigation tonight. But first, I like to set the scene of where we are in time. So right now it's fall in Sonoma County. It's a really fun time to be in Sonoma. And we are experiencing warm days with cooler and cooler nights. The winds are picking up, we have more cloud cover, and we got our first rains, which is very exciting. And this means our fire danger is starting to decrease. As far as plants, they're still blooming. Plenty of things are still flowering. And that's a good thing because they're producing nectar and pollen, which helps all of our pollinators. And that are also, a lot of them are migrating right now. So they're looking for that extra food. And plant growth is starting to shift to the roots. So we move away from having the blooms, and plants start putting their energy back into the roots to prepare for the cooler season. Our evergreen oaks are starting to wake up. They are dormant in the summer. Our deciduous oaks are starting to lose their leaves, and so are all deciduous plants right now. Plants are moving into seed production and starting to die back. What is still blooming? We have buckwheats, monkey flowers are holding on, plenty of sage varieties, goldenrod, California fuchsia, yarrow, and coyote mint. So still many of our natives are still producing. But one of the most exciting things about this time of year is fall is for planting. It's also for reaping the harvest, keeping plants properly hydrated depending on our rain cycle. It's time for some pruning, preparing the soil, and collecting seed for next year. One important concept to keep in mind when we are planting or maybe making edits in our existing landscape is right plant, right place. And this relates to everything that we've talked about through these 4 parts because we want good design in our garden, right? It's aesthetically pleasing, but also it allows us to easily maintain our gardens and our landscapes and maintain them in a way that helps keep us safer from fire threat. So the right maintenance supports beauty, but also biodiversity and reduces our fire hazard. So let's jump into those maintenance practices. We have pruning, I'll start with, then I'll talk a little bit about mowing, followed by irrigation, and then some more mulching talk. It's a big one in this fire escaping world. And when you think about maintenance, you want to think about regular maintenance, annual maintenance, and long-term maintenance. So things you need to get out in there and do semi-regularly, what happens maybe once a year, or a couple times a year, and then overall, what's the grand plan of your landscape? So first, pruning. Pruning is a bit of an art and a science. And when we prune for vigor, health, and safety of plants and for ourselves. We want to maintain the integrity and balance of plants when we prune. That's our goal. And we're looking for anything that's dead, dying, diseased, or crossing branches that make a tight space. And when we prune, we always want to work with clean and sharp tools. And when we're doing that, we want to go slow, make our cuts, but then always step back and make sure you do that a couple times while you're pruning. And every time you're cutting, you should be asking yourself, why am I making this cut? When we prune for fire safety, we have a few other goals in mind. We want to be considering our horizontal spacing, so how close plants are together. We want to consider our vertical spacing. So if we think in terms of fire that's moving across the ground plane, would this fire stay low or does it have the capacity to get high into the tree canopy? We'll talk more about that in a minute. We always want to be removing dead material from any plants, and we want to be thinking about thinning our plants rather than hedging them. So making thinning cuts, coming in and selectively taking out material rather than just coming in with a hedger tool like this and making a ton of cuts all at once. Because what it does is that cuts off the live material on the outside and keeps forcing the plant to push growth further and further out. But if you pull back some of that live growth on the tips, you'll see there's a lot of dead branching underneath. And all of those dead branches can get very dense, and they also collect a lot of debris such as leaves. So we want to avoid hedging like this when thinking about fire safety. And of course, we always want to be pruning to rejuvenate a plant. So here's another way to talk about thinking about the horizontal and vertical spacing. So we want to avoid a fuel ladder, it's called. And this is keeping the distance from the lower plants away from the tree canopy. And our rule of thumb is actually 3 times the size of a plant. We want 3 times the amount of space between the lowest branch of the tree. So if we have a shrub here that's 3 feet tall, we want to multiply that by 3 and actually have 9 feet of space between the top of the shrub and the lowest branch. And this is to avoid a fire coming through, engulfing this shrub and then moving to the tree canopy, where now we have a hotter fire potentially and a taller fire that will be casting embers that can spread even further. So we want to avoid this. And here's another example in real terms. So here you can see a shrub below a tree. And in order to eliminate that fuel laddering, this shrub was cut back. So it was cut away from the tree, giving that horizontal space, and then also cut down from the tree, so giving vertical spacing. And also this lower limb was taken off. And then also here, an even more in-depth look of what's going on with this shrub. This is a type of shrub that can really gather a lot of debris and have a lot of dead material as it grows outward. So coming in and cleaning away that dead material, because if you think about embers falling, that could cause a fire right there. So a little more about this selective pruning technique, or thinning, we call it. It's very important. And here again, it is in practice, in pictures. So see, just selecting different branches to create a less dense canopy of a tree, or the same idea applies to any shrub. And it's a way to control the size and shape of a tree or shrub and help develop its natural beauty. And also, it can be beneficial to limb up a large shrub, not just trees. And you can create a shrub into more of a tree form, especially as it gets older. A little more about pruning shrubs. So there are herbaceous perennials, which are non-woody shrubs, and there are woody shrubs. And when working with them, we always want to remove diseased or dead plant parts, and we can do that any time of the year that you see them. And some of our shrubs can be cut back every 2 to 3 years to reduce that old woody growth. And of course, we want to be careful about shearing. Another common technique for pruning is deadheading. And this is where you just come in and cut off any spent blooms. This can encourage a rebloom. And penstemon and monkey flower are two of our natives that respond really well to this process. Also yarrow. And alternatively, if we're not in a high fire time of year with risk, you can leave some seed heads for the wildlife. This is food for our local birds and other animals, so you can leave them. Another pruning technique to know about is cutting back hard, or coppicing. And this is a way to renew older, overgrown woody plants. So some of our plants can handle a really big cutback. And here's an example. This is coyote brush. That can take a big pruning, especially if you've got a lot of spindly growth or a lot of dense growth happening, or if they get really old, they can get all old and knobby looking. So you can cut it back drastically and it will rejuvenate. Other plants that you can do this with are California fuchsia, our deer grasses, coyote brush here, and toyon. Here's another example in the real world. So this is coyote mint. That's this purple flower here. This is in the fall time. You can see there's growth. It's done blooming. And then in the winter, you can come back and cut it quite low to the ground. In spring, it will rejuvenate, push out new fresh growth, and then have a beautiful bloom come summer. All right, pruning trees. We have a few recommendations related to that. First of all, it's a good idea to consult a licensed arborist if needed, especially if you have heritage trees or very large trees, been there a long time, or if your beloved tree has some kind of disease, it's a really good idea to have a licensed arborist come take a look. And of course, we never want to prune trees that are near electric lines ourselves. But for as far as fire safety, remember removing those lower limbs to 6 feet from the ground. If it's just the ground plane below, just mulch or grass, you want to limb up 6 feet. Or if you have a very large tree above 30 feet, you want to limb up at least that 1/3 of the height of that tree. And then keeping in mind the fuel laddering that we just talked about. And Sonoma County Code requires at least 10 feet distance of branches from chimneys or stovepipes. And we also have talked a bit about the new legislation related to Zone 0, and that will likely have a definite amount of feet that trees or branches must be from structures. So stay tuned for that. All right, so transitioning to mowing. So if we're having dry weather, we only want to be using a mower before 10 a.m. We don't want to have any accidental sparks. We don't want to be mowing on excessively dry material. And especially if it's windy, we don't want to be mowing. And especially if it's a red flag warning day, which I will talk a little bit more about in a minute. If we're mowing in the spring, we do want to check the area for birds and avoid areas where they are nesting, because some of our beloved birds do nest on the ground. And if the ground is super saturated after prolonged rains, we also don't want to be out there mowing. That can cause compaction of our soil. So we don't want to do that, or divots, etc. When mowing, we want to stay ahead of weeds. That's a big reason for mowing here in Sonoma County. And we want to do it before those seed heads even form is the goal. If you look here at a species like this, every single one of these little fluffs has a bunch of tiny seeds in it, and every one of those can become a new plant. Same here and same here. So before these seed heads develop is key to mow before then. We want to be removing invasive species and high-risk plants. And we want to mow or trim our grass or weeds to 4 inches in the spring and the summer, and 6 inches next to roadways. Okay, for mulching, which we have talked about in previous iterations, but a mulch, the true definition is anything that covers the soil is a mulch. And mulch can be organic or inorganic, meaning was it made from something that was once alive, like wood chips, or inorganic, like stone. And there are many benefits to mulching. We do recommend you do this and not leave large swaths of your landscape without some kind of coverage. Mulch provides water conservation. It prevents soil compaction, prevents erosion, reduces the dust, suppresses weeds, visually enhances the landscape, and can even cool the soil, especially if it's an organic mulch. And some examples are wood chips, or we call it also arbor mulch, stone, gravel, straw, coconut fiber, leaf litter, grass trimmings, and compost. Those are all examples of mulch that are not all created equal, and they have different benefits and drawbacks to them. So it really depends on your specific landscape and your goals. And organic mulches like wood chips, straw, and leaf litter can help improve your soil's tilth. So the consistency of the soil, and it helps feed the soil's life because there's a lot going on beneath our feet in the soil. There was a mulch study done in 2008, and out of the 8 types that were studied, composted arbor mulch or composted wood chips was the one that had the least burn rate or the lowest burn rate. And we recommend applying this mulch 2 to 3 inches deep in your landscape anywhere outside of zone 0. So 5 feet and outwards in your landscape is where you can use composted arbor mulch. And when we say that, that means it's a mulch from trees that has had a time to sit and kind of cure. So it's been out exposed to the elements, it's been turned, it's been watered, and it's starting to break down. So if it has oils or things like that, some of those are starting to break down, and that can help reduce your risk for flammability. We do want to avoid very small pieces of bark, and we don't want shredded redwood or cedar like this. This is called gorilla hair mulch. We want to avoid this type of mulch, we want to avoid bringing this into our landscape if it's not already present, because this had the highest hazardous combustion characteristics when it was studied in that mulch study. Another note about mulch. Leaf litter is nature's natural mulch, and it is important for nutrients. It protects and feeds the soil. And the benefit is that it breaks down over seasons, so it can have a long protection time. But when it's very dry and we have a high fire risk, we don't want a lot of excess leaves built up close to our structures, or even potentially a lot of it throughout our landscape. So if it's very dry, if we're in a fire risk season, we want to remove those dead leaves and they can be composted. But if we have had rains, the landscape is wetter, then we can keep more of that leaf litter on site. Okay, transitioning to irrigation. So proper irrigation will keep plants hydrated, healthy, beautiful, and less flammable. We want to avoid excess watering, though. So we know we need water, but we don't want to give too much. Now, the good news about native plants is, in general, they need less water than some of our plants brought in from tropical areas or other parts of the world. And we also, when we are watering, we want to prevent excessive growth. So if we're watering too much, plants push out more growth, and that likely will be spindly or weak growth, and it could require us to do more work, more pruning, thinning, and removing it. So it is a balance. Too much water can also kill plants, especially natives, because they are adapted to our summer dry climate. And spring and fall, right now, is the time to change the settings on your irrigation controller. So we've had our first rain. It's time to make adjustments. And here's a slide specifically about irrigation for natives. So as I said, they are adapted to our summer dry climate. And many natives drink in the wintertime because that's when we get most of our water, usually. And natives enjoy deep, infrequent watering. So they would prefer a long session of water infrequently rather than a few minutes many times a week. Now, newly planted natives do need more water than they will later in life. They do take 1 to 3 years to establish. So, when you first plant, maybe this fall, it's going to take 1 year, 2 years for them to really grow their roots deep enough and establish so you can pull back on that watering. It's a good idea to check them weekly in that first year, especially during their first summer. Now we've had some rain so far. We hope we get a lot more, but if we do have a dry winter, it's important to check your soil. And you can do that using one of these inexpensive moisture meters, just quickly doing a check and seeing if you need to water your natives again. So irrigation can be tricky. Your best bet is to get to know your plants. And then once you do, you want to determine their thirstiness. And the way we do that is by thinking about their sun exposure. Are they getting full sun, part sun during a day? Are they on a slope? How much wind does your part of the county get on a given day or week? What species of plant are we talking about? What season are we currently in? And how mature is this plant? Newly planted, been established for 10 years. So, one way we can assign water use to different plants is by using this tool called WUCLS, or the Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. And this tool has assigned a water use level to many, many plants. And the water use level could be high, moderate, low, or very low. So you can look this up online. Here's the website. Sorry, it's yellow and hard to see, but we do have it in the chat. And you can look up a specific plant. It'll tell you its water needs. So when thinking about designing, it's a good idea to try and group plants that need similar amounts of water near each other. It'll help you when you're thinking about irrigation. And most of our natives, our California native plants, fall between low and very low. So if you're thinking about water savings, that's a great place to start. Okay, a little bit of a deeper dive on maintenance activities per season. So in the fall, which starts in September, goes through November, our focus is planting prep, mulching, and transitioning our landscape for the cooler months. So we want to finish our seasonal pruning and mowing by early fall, and we can begin planting as soon as consistent rains return. So we are just getting into that really fun window. We want to refresh our mulch and maybe add compost as needed to the garden. Pause our irrigation. It's almost time to sow wildflower seed and grass seed for spring. And this time of year, we can leave more leaf litter under shrubs and trees to support soil life and wildlife. Moving into winter, December through February, we are still focusing on planting, pruning, and building our soil. We can plant trees, especially our bare root trees that come in around January. So that's fruit trees and shrubs and perennials while the soil is moist and roots are dormant. We can begin dormant pruning of our deciduous shrubs and trees, so plants that lose their leaves can be pruned in late December through February. We want to water only if we have prolonged dry spells and weed after those rains when the soil is soft. That is key. Start weeding earlier than you probably think. And we can cut back our bunch grasses before they grow in spring, generally in February. We want to lightly mulch and compost around plant bases, but keep mulch away from any tree crowns. to prevent disease or rotting. Moving into spring, our focus is weed management and more weed management, but also monitoring our garden for fire prep, especially, or getting fire prep started. And we get to watch for pollinators. So we want to weed aggressively as those annuals start to sprout and spread. We want to reduce irrigation for established plants because there might be enough water coming through spring. We want to avoid pruning or mowing during nesting season. So most of our birds nest through March through August. So we want to be sensitive to their needs for space. So be very careful, check your plants before doing major pruning. And to prepare for fire, we want to clear those fuels, any extra plant growth, that dead or dying material, any of the debris that has fallen underneath or gotten inside of plants. And we want to be trimming vegetation near structures. We also want to give a deep watering to new plants as the rainfall starts to taper off and we move into summer. Now in summer, June through August, our focus is fire safety, pruning, and deep irrigation. So that deep, infrequent watering for natives every 2 to 3 weeks, light pruning for shape or safety, late summer pruning of evergreen shrubs like toyon and coffeeberry, so after their bloom, mowing native grass meadows, removing any dry vegetation and debris, and not planting in the summer. It's too hot and stressful for definitely for our natives, but for most plants too. They don't want their roots exposed to the heat and dry outside temperatures and also even the soil. So don't plant in summer. And just some notes about specifically red flag warning days. So special precautions during high risk time. We want to place any movable objects, such as this, that might be within 5 feet of the home. We want to move those outside of zone 0. So this could be trash cans, deck furniture, potted plants, mats, tools, brooms, right? All those things that accumulate against our structures over time. If we are in a red flag warning, move them. We also want to be sure to check our roof and gutters for debris, so fallen leaves, fallen branches, etc. We want to review our zone 1. So at 5 feet to 30 feet out from our structures, make sure there's no dry or dead plant material or accumulated debris. We want to give plants an extra soak to assure they're fully hydrated. So not just, randomly spraying out in the garden, but giving a good soak to those plants that can handle it or might need it at that time. And we don't want to mow or use gas-powered tools during red flag warning days. Okay, that concludes my portion of the presentation. And here again are our websites and some of those extra resources I mentioned before. All right, I'll turn it back over to the group.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Great job. So much great information shared. My name is Mimi Enright, and I'm going to help moderate the Q&A session, which is we have time until 6:30. So please feel free to add any questions you may have to the Q&A box, and we will address those as a group. So, Jen, our first question came early in your presentation, but it was around when do you recommend pruning? And I think it's such an important point. Can you just reiterate your pruning timing, the kind of the basic framing that folks should understand on their pruning timing?
Sure. So the best time to prune flowering plants is after they've flowered for the year, because we don't want to, cut off all the energy they're putting into their beautiful blooms. And for trees, during dormant times is recommended. So for fruit trees during the winter, for our oak trees, the evergreen ones is during summer. And then mowing in spring, etc. So yeah, any other types of plants pruning I'm missing?
No, I think you did a great job on that. Thank you.
Okay.
But actually, I take that back. There is a specific question about pruning lavender. And how do you recommend pruning lavender that has lots of woody interior? Oh, it looks like
Mhm.
Roberta has a comment on that.
Actually, I have a question, so go ahead and answer the lavender question. And then
Okay.
I have a question about pruning.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So with lavender, getting in there and you can do selective thinning of it. And you can also you can cut off some of the lower branches. You can skirt that up too. So you can expose the soil underneath. Um, but yeah, and lavenders, they do have a lifespan. So they're not gonna, maybe live 10, 15 years. So if you do see dieback, that's kind of part of their natural lifespan.
Yeah, so I think actually expected lifespan is like 7 years for lavender. So, and it gets really woody as it ages. You definitely, when you prune it, you need to leave some of the green growth. You don't want to prune it all the way back to just the woody interior with no green growth, or it's not going to resprout for you. So you have to be really careful about that pruning. But no, if you plant lavender, ideally you're going to be replacing that probably every 7 years. And April, I saw you had your hand up.
I agree. I mean, I was just going to reiterate what you said. I think I
Yeah.
see it as similar to Salvia clevelandii that we have in our landscape, kind of as the replacement of lavender as the native option. But definitely, if you go to lavender production places, depending on where your lavender's from English lavender or French lavender, they definitely cut them back hard, like Mimi said, into little balls. So it depends on what you want to get out of them as well.
There's
All
another
right.
question that aligns with this, if
Great.
we're ready to maybe jump to another one.
Sure.
It is, when mowing California native grass, is it still recommended to mow before seed heads form?
Go for it, April.
I looked it up while Jen was talking because we use a lot of that Delta bluegrass no mow native mixes. So there's a couple of different options that we talked about last week, and they say, and then also with native grasses when they're young, it's best to leave them to go to seed and then mow them after seed because they need to put that energy into their cycle, and then as they get older they are more resilient, but they're pretty tender when they're young. So that was what I kind of got out of reading. Jen, is that what your thoughts are on mowing native grasses?
Yeah, and of course, if you're growing them for the seed head, right, like Butaloa is eyebrow grass, right? That's for the beauty of that. So let that do its thing.
Yeah, and like deer grass, we're seeing like every other year you can cut it back to the ground really hard. So it's kind of, I think they were asking more about like mowing, like native grass meadowy kind of
Mhm.
things. But the native grasses all, you should really look into calscape.org and see what the best treatment of each of the bunch grasses are and when you should cut them back.
And something to note for either of those is like, well, if it's not completely full, like your lawn is still young. Sorry, I was just getting a call on my phone. But if you still have a younger lawn, it might be good to let it go to seed, and then it might fill in any sort of gaps you have. And then on the flip side, like if you do cut it, it might put less energy into the seeds and more into growing its roots deeper.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's the give and take of like think about where the energy is going and where you want it to go. And we can always try to direct. We might not be able to, but yeah, give it a little nudge in one or the other directions, whether towards seed production or root production.
Awesome. Great comments. Thanks, everybody. I want to tap back in. Roberta, did you have another comment question around pruning and pruning
Yeah, I
timing?
did. I have a question about pruning. So I think I shared with you guys last fall. In the fall, um, I planted some California poppies, and they bloomed a little late, but beautifully. But since then, now after the summer months, they kind of turned brown, but it looks like there's some other poppies growing in like underneath. And I was out there this morning and I saw what I thought was a brown one, and I went to pull it. And when I pulled it out, root and all, it had a sprout that was green. So, am I meant to prune those rather than just try to pull out what looks brown? And
Pearl
I'm
or Jen,
like
I certainly have my opinions on this, but I'd love to hear what Jen and April
yeah,
have to
because
share.
let me qualify where I'm at for our audience is I'm kind of like these guys' worst case scenario because I'm learning a lot from them, and I'm like the one that asks the goofy questions because I'm just learning this. I'm a somewhat informed novice at this.
It's real
think
for a
that's a
lot of
super good
our
question.
community.
That's a super good question. I'd be interested what Mimi has her feelings about it.
Well, I don't have any problem with California poppies spreading at will. And if I pull out some that are in a spot where they always come up in the middle of a pathway, I'll let them go because they're so beautiful.
Yeah.
But I don't have any problem pulling them because I know I'm going to have them well populated through their seed dispersal in other areas. So it doesn't usually give me much pause to pull a
Okay.
California poppy, because I know I'm going to have enough that are going to seed that I'm going to get enough distribution from them. And they have a super deep tap root.
Yeah. Like a
But
carrot.
for Jen's comment, I mean, if you've waited and we've had some rain, they're much easier to pull. But I don't know. That's my
I
opinion.
like that. That's great, Mimi. And you won't get arrested for pulling out the puppies.
Oh, that was my next question.
I've never heard of that, but you never know. You never know.
Well,
But
we better not see you on the side of the freeway pulling out the poppies, you know.
Won't.
So
No, I
Jen
love
or
them
Eric, did
dearly.
you have any
So
other thoughts on California poppies?
Well, I love them.
I do
So,
too.
yeah,
Yeah,
they
they're
just
fantastic.
They're magic.
So
yeah.
And
thanks for that,
and
Mimi. I appreciate that. It
Yeah.
I
reduces a
always feel
lot of the
bad too.
anxiety I was having.
Roberta, I always feel bad too when I'm like pulling, and you're like, oh, there's like life on there, but like Mimi said, they just like right now. I think this is going to be a really big wildflower season because already I have thousands of poppies like in weird spots in the
Nice.
yard, and it's just November, so.
But I gotta say, you have to be really careful with your wildflower cutback. I had a whole beautiful established California native wildflower meadow on a hill up above my cottage in like 30 to 100 feet. It was gorgeous, thrived for a number of years. I'd sowed it this time of year and it just took off. Um, and then I was nervous about fire season and I cut it back too early and I didn't get reseeding and I lost the like 90% of the meadow. So you really have to be careful about your timing to make sure you've had seed set with your California native wildflowers and before you do cut back. So I would have been fine in my 30 to 100, but it was just I was getting nervous with fire
Nervous
season
here.
coming on and cut it back too soon. So you have to be careful.
And I'm always talking to my neighbors about that because I have a pretty scrappy looking front yard around late August because I'm letting all the wildflowers go into seed because the birds want them too. So I think there was another question about birds in there.
Yeah, and so Jen, let's turn to that one. And thanks for that, April. Do we leave some plants seed heads for birds to eat?
Yeah, it's a good idea if you're not feeling like you're in a high risk situation, or especially if the seed heads are further out. Yeah, it's fabulous to watch your birds come feast all through fall and into winter.
Yeah, so absolutely a good to keep a balance of where you want it more manicured and where you want to leave seed heads for bird food. Very, very important. Let's see. I'm going to turn to another bird question before we go to a compost question. Chris Kilgore asks, is there information we can have about nesting birds? Are there typical locations where bird nests are built? If we find these nests without disturbing them, maybe we could do some work around them, question mark. And I don't know if Eric or April or Jen, if you have thoughts you want to share on this great question.
Looks
yeah,
like
sorry,
Eric.
I'm recording on my computer, so I'm doing everything on my phone. It's a little bit janky,
Oh,
but
no worries.
I
Sorry.
just put in the chat a resource that is basically I worked with Marin County Parks in the past, and they do a really great training for doing bird surveys. And a couple years back, I helped make a resource online called Tending the Land, we talk all about. Basically, what I did was take the training from Marin County Parks and put it into the website. So you can go and check that out, and it kind of tells you how to approach doing bird nesting surveys. And the short is they can nest just about anywhere. It's pretty surprising sometimes. The best thing to do is during bird nesting season, which generally starts around February and goes through, the height of it is through like maybe May or June. It extends a little on either side if you're looking at like things like northern spotted owls or others that are more specialized. But just watch the birds. If they're moving materials, if they're, hanging around a single spot, and when you come around, they're making noises. There's a lot of different things to look out for, but a lot of it has to do with knowing your space and spending time in it, and then you'll get a better perspective on where they might be.
And Eric, I'm always really nervous because right around June 15th is when the firefighters want us to start mowing and doing large scale weed whacking because the seed heads are on the non-native grasses, and I just get in a panic around, these huge, we have huge sites that we're, managing, and like, we don't really have the staff to go walk the line. And so whatever I know you've said this, given that feedback before, but I'm curious what you think about how to deal with that.
Totally. Yeah, it's a tough one. I think my take would generally be, if you can, even if it's just the morning of the work when you're starting, the best time to do bird surveys is between 7 a.m. and 11 a.m. After that, they're really not active. They tend to be more crepuscular, like they're active at the beginning of the day and then towards the end. But just take a peek around on the site right when you get there, and if you notice any kind of specialized activity, that's one way to do it. At least you're doing something. And then if you happen to be working and you see a bird nest, just give it some space. And the
Yeah.
whole take is, if you do catch a bird nest, there's some specific standards for how far to stay away, but at least just give it 10 feet. If you're working with like heavy equipment, the further you can, if it's really noisy, obviously. But um, generally just not uncovering nests, because that's when predators will come in and steal the eggs, unfortunately.
Do quail nest in shrubbery more, or are they out in the open grassland?
It's a great question. I think generally in the shrubbery.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only animal I really know that nests like actively in an open grassland would be like killdeer.
Mhm. Mhm.
They'll just their eggs kind of blend in with whatever's on the ground pretty well. And they have other adaptive features or behaviors that help them keep their eggs alive. But yeah, in the shrubs.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Eric. So I'm going to shift to a mulch question from Marianne, and Marianne's actually in San Mateo County. Thanks for joining us, Marianne. Glad you heard about the webinar tonight. Spread the word. It applies in San Mateo County as well as Sonoma County. She's asking, where do you get the composted arbor mulch, especially if you need enough for a large area? And April or Eric or Jen, any thoughts on that? For Eric managing on
I
his
don't
phone.
know in San Mateo County all that well. We have started recommending like going to your landscape materials yard and actually looking at the material and making sure it has like compost and it's composted and it's not too woody. So I would go to your local landscape, I would, Google or look into your local landscape materials yards and then go down there and take a look at it and see if it is composted. Ask them how long they keep it, just get to know your local materials yard, because you'll need to keep adding it every couple of years as well.
Yeah, and ask questions, absolutely. But you need to be careful. You don't want to be mulching in a really widespread fashion. I know it's really tough if you have a large area, but you want to break up your mulched areas if possible to break up the flow of fire. It's probably a little easier, for a larger area out in 30 to 100, but for sure, if you're mulching in the 5 to 30 foot zone, you want to make sure you're breaking up those mulched areas.
Yeah, and one good question to ask too is like, where is it sourced? What is it made of?
Yeah.
Does it have invasive species? Because even if it's not, there's no seeds in it, it might be a species that you can just have little propagules, little chunks turn into a new new thing, and then you have an invasive species kind of hanging out.
A new
So that's a
problem to
good one.
deal
And
with.
then same with Mimi. Like if you can, especially beyond 100 feet, but even as you're getting closer to the 100 feet, the end of the defensible space, like leave natural mulch. If trees are dropping leaves and things like that, let nature do its work for you. And then you have less to worry about. But yeah, those are kind of my inputs.
Great comments, Eric. Thank you. All right, this is a popular one, you guys, from Sharon. Any recommendations for weeding in a rock pathway? April, if you have some
Oh,
inspirations from your landscape installation work.
Any recommendations for weeding in a rock pathway? Well, I mean, we do a lot of like base rock, and then using pretty rock on top of the bird poop brings in plenty of weed seed. I think we talked about this extensively last week, but there's strong like horticultural vinegars that you can use on a hot day, but we're heading into like this cooler season that really doesn't help. I wouldn't spray vinegar now, right, Jen? I mean, it's just not gonna work. Like Jen said, staying on top of it, like the minute the rain comes, you got to start. If you can get the little weed when it's this big versus like all of a sudden it's gigantic, that's really the key. But I'm really naughty in my garden, and things get a little crazy out there before I get, out to see. Like weeds grow so fast. It's amazing.
You always feel like, oh, I've got some more time before I have to really start tackling the weeding for the season. And then it just like spreads like wildfire. So you really got to stay on top of it early.
Yeah.
And if you
I
can
was
try
pulling
to get
some
on
this
top of
weekend.
it, if you can try to get on top of your weeds before they seed, so that's a key piece. Even with like trying to get non-native grasses out of there, you want to like try to get, pull those weeds before they seed. And so if you can just take a cruise through your garden, even like dandelions, I'm infamous for having dandelions. Oh, and Julie wants us to slow down, I think.
I was just gonna say, yeah, let's maybe we can give our
Sorry, we're probably
interpreter just a
talking
little
over each
break.
other.
All right. We have another question from Marianne that I'm going to turn to before another pruning question. Can you just cut back the old growth of wildfires, but cut the seed heads off and throw them in your flower area, or do they need to be on the plant? Well, they need to have fully gone to seed. That's the key. If you cut too early and you drop and you leave the seed heads, if they haven't fully gone to seed, you're defeating the purpose, which is what I did. But April or Eric or Jen, I don't know if you have other thoughts on that question.
Same as you said, just make sure they're actually seated. And that's kind of a difficult task. I always err on the side of caution of like, if I'm not sure, let them hang out a little bit longer.
Yep, I can attest to that from painful, sad experience of losing my wildflower meadow. Okay, our last question, which is great. We've got a few more minutes before we're wrapping up. What happens when you prune a plum tree too early? This old tree was super skinny, leggy, and tall, and had already fruited and then lost its leaves. The owner could never reach the fruit on top, so they simply cut a good 2 feet off of each of the tallest branches. I don't know if, Jen, you have any insights on plum tree pruning and timing, or I will say you can do some pretty aggressive management to try to cut back an overgrown fruiting tree in the winter during dormant season. Plants are pretty resilient. And especially for fruiting trees, if it's a healthy tree, its imperative is to put out new growth. So you can be pretty aggressive in trying to scale back a tree that hasn't been appropriately pruned over time. And Jen, do you have any other thoughts on that one?
This person added they cut the tops off last week. So, yeah, this is a hard time to prune fruit trees because you are opening them up to disease by having those open wounds once we get rains. Make sure after fruiting, you are cleaning up the fruit and composting it, and then putting fresh compost on in the springtime. You could also do it now and have the winter rains help disperse the nutrients into the soil. But just, watch it. Keep an eye on it.
Definitely. All right, that's the last of our questions. So I think we're at a close for tonight. We want to thank you all for joining us and for hanging in till the end of the session. As Rachel shared in the chat, and you can certainly go to our website or our YouTube channel. We have this whole series of videos and many past session videos if you want to do a deeper dive on these topics. Please don't hesitate to go check out our videos, and we look forward to seeing you at hopefully a future Resilient Landscapes Coalition event.